Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to give you another minute to let more people join before we start. Stand by, please. Okay, everybody, good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Vince Scanlon. I'm from the Merrill class of 1984. I spent 16 years as a reporter, and since 2000 moved over to financial services media relations. I joined the board of the Journalism Alumni Network, or JAN, last year, and today, JAN is hosting the event along with the Merrill School of Journalism. Please follow JAN on Instagram. We can be found at jan@UMD, JANATUMD, and Facebook, UMD Journalism Alumni Network. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator today. Shannon Clash is a 2015 graduate of the Merrill School and received a master's in strategic communications from American University. She spent 5 years working for NBC News at NBC4 and on the network level in various roles, including time on the news desk, Today Show, nightly news, and as a news gathering field producer. She left the news business in 2020 to pursue a corporate career as a comms specialist at the American Hospital Association Center for Health Innovation during the pandemic. Today, she's in Chicago as a story supervisor for advertising agency FCB Chicago and is leading a new team called The Newsroom. Please welcome Shannon Clash.
Thank you, Vince, so much for that wonderful introduction. Outside of myself, I would love to introduce the rest of our phenomenal panel that we have on here that have taken their careers beyond the beat. Starting with my former classmate from the class of 15, Taylor Cairns, creative communication specialist at the Baltimore City Police Department. Then we have Michael Hughes of class of 02, diversity program manager at the United States Office of Personnel Management. Kimberly Kaplan of class of 08, senior manager for global creative marketing at Netflix. And finally, we have Ben Meyerson, class of 09, director of marketing at Ipsos of North America. So for all my audience members, even though I will be asking questions, please do not hesitate to add questions to our chats. I know there's a lot of journalists on here. You have a lot of questions, so just pop them in there and we'll make sure we have time for you. So for all my panelists, let's go back to college. I know it's been a while for all of us, but let's kind of go back and really think about memory lane. I want to start by having us really talk about our Merrill made journey. How has college degree or experience helped you in your current professional life? And we can have with anyone to start.
Sure, I'll go ahead and start. Thanks. So I would say for me, the thing that made Merrill so special for us in terms of skills that we were able to then take out into the real world is the wide range of education that we experienced at Merrill. We weren't just learning one facet of journalism while we were in school, and that is so beneficial when you think of what you're able to do in the real world, both in news and out of news. The ability to learn how to shoot and edit video, as well as be able to manage projects, social media, everything else under the moon. It really makes a difference, that Merrill experience being Merrill made in what you're able to provide to a job.
Yeah, just me personally, I really enjoyed. I did CNS, which in the DC newsroom at the time, that was something that for undergrads that was that was really more designed for grad students. So it was a little bit of a leap to get out there and be down there for a semester every day on Capitol Hill, going to congressional hearings and getting clips in major newspapers across the country. That really kind of gave me a leg up as I was looking for internships and my next step in a professional career in a journalism market that was really hard to get into when I graduated in 2009. Having that experience was really valuable for me. But also just like Taylor said, the variety of stuff on campus. I was a DJ at WMUC, which was a lot of fun, but also just like just a really great way to get experience with talking and speaking publicly. and just the people and all the different variety of folks doing different things on a big kind of vibrant campus like Maryland.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say, I think like one of the greatest things about being at Merrill was it was such a practical education. It wasn't just this like theoretical, this is what journalism is. It was a safe space to like get your hands dirty, try different things. You know, when I started, I was like, do I want to do print? Do I want to do broadcast? I went the broadcast route, but it was like, okay, like let's play in this radio space. Like, let me get my hands dirty editing. And then to then take that kind of scrappiness and that opportunity to try all those things into the internship opportunities, that being just so close to Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, I think it opened up such a huge funnel to network news opportunities and real working journalists who were doing what I wanted to be doing in a way that so many of my future colleagues down the road didn't have that same exposure. And I think it really helped me zero in on, when I was working in news, what exactly it was I wanted to do in news.
Yeah, and I'll follow up very similar comments to my co-panelists. I was also a broadcast major, graduated in 02, and also got the opportunity to work for the Capitol News Service in the College Park. I think I was the second class. I was an undergrad working in Capitol News Service. And anybody who's ever worked in CNS knows that some of the best experience that you can get as a person still in school is through Capitol News Service, which obviously is at the Merrill School. And just being able to edit and to write and to anchor and to direct even, you get that experience through Merrill. And it was a full course experience. Another thing that I benefited from was the exposure to professional networks. The National Association of Black Journalists, NABJ, was headquartered, at least at the time when I was there 22 years ago, in College Park. So just my exposure in and around College Park got me exposed not only to the practical education, but also the professional networks that you can tap into and then develop professional relationships and mentorships with. So great experience from Merrill.
And I think we've all spoken to the fact that like there were professors that all of us got to, you know, not only learn, but they were working outside of their day-to-day profession of teaching us, you know, budding journalists. There's also the fact that we had Huffman, who was teaching us ethics, and then she would go on CNN or she would go to another newscast and talk about ethics. So even that experience, or even Capitol News Service, you know, we have Sue and we have Cindy, at least for my time, that we were very much like pushing us to push the mold. Like she knew. I was always telling her, I'm like, I don't know about this whole, you know, day turn thing. I'm not sure about this, but creating a space for us to make series and documentaries and stuff like that and really kind of do that research goes the distance. So as we kind of talk about that transition from college to really having that like aha moment, I want to do a quick raise of hands for us on the panel. Raise your hand if you took some time in the traditional news journalism field. Okay, all of us. Raise your hand if you did any type of fellowship, mentorship program, internship. Okay. And then raise your hand if you had like a mentor during this process of kind of figuring out where you wanted to go. All right. So let's go right with Kimberly. Tell us about what you currently do at Netflix, which is amazing, and what really intrigued you to go into this creative marketing field.
Yeah, so I've been at Netflix for almost 6 years, working on the marketing side. And so in my day-to-day job, I lead marketing campaigns for a bunch of our unscripted shows. So Love is Blind, Selling Sunset, very different than hard news, but very fun. And the job really is a great mix of strategy and creative. So I do everything from kind of thinking about, okay, how are we bringing the stories of this season or this new show, whatever it may be, to the market, to fans, to make them not only interested in it, but really like engaged with it and driving that fandom. And so that is everything from leading on kind of how we're thinking about this show and how it shows up on social media, how it shows up in out of home, so like billboards, activations, that type of thing, as well as I create all of the trailers and the main campaign beats. So it's really a storytelling job, but it's really driven by strategy. And so it's a great balance of the things that I learned in my news career and in my journalism education. But it's just a different way of applying them. And so for me, I think I was working in news at the network level for like 7 years, and I realized that it wasn't what I wanted to do forever anymore. And so I actually first made the leap to work at Snapchat when it was in its early days. And so I was one of the first people kind of producing on their content team. And that experience exposed me to all of these people doing just totally different jobs than I even knew existed, to be honest. And so I was so lucky to be at this company that was only like 300 people. And I was meeting people who were the engineers. I was meeting people who worked on the sales side. And I was meeting like creative strategists who are really working with brands on how to tell their stories and bring their advertising campaigns to that platform. And I was like, huh, that's kind of fun. That's kind of interesting. Like, I feel like my brain is working in this way. And so I really started to explore what would it look like to be on the advertising side, to be in marketing, and got an amazing opportunity at Netflix, which was and still is a place that really embraced hiring people who didn't necessarily have a traditional background. So I didn't need to have been a marketing executive for the last, 10 years to land an opportunity there. I think that they really appreciated the experience and knowledge that I had from news, and I was able to apply so much of that in a different way to this job. But for me, what's so fun about it is the storytelling aspect. So like, I'm working on Love is Blind right now. We have season 6, and I just put out a cast announcement where I really got to tell the authentic stories of these people who are going into the experience of this dating show, and try to, elevate voices and stories that we maybe don't always see on television. And so for me, it's this great kind of, I understand production, right? I understand how TV works. I understand content, but now I get to tell stories about the content instead of, just telling the story of the content, I guess.
And there's something awesome about coming from Merrill and really being taught to be active learners. And, from those classes of like 360 and knowing how to do research and really kind of get it really quickly, there's something that really makes it easier in these new spaces of being like, oh, I know how to talk about to people. I know how to find out their stories. I know how to produce it. Now we can go even further from that moment. So that's amazing.
Working in news, right? So much of your job as a journalist is becoming an instant expert on the story that you're going to report on and tell. And so that was like the thirst for knowledge and just like totally just diving headfirst into something new and learning felt natural.
And then Taylor, when you think about your transferable skills and what your superpower that really makes you stand out from coming from traditional news to where you are right now, how have you applied those skills to what you do?
Yeah, so for me, honestly, there are some similar elements to what Kimberly was talking about. But for me, the most important part is your ability to tell a good story. And at Merrill, there were so many different avenues in which storytelling was a big deal for me. I was the news director at WMUC. A bunch of us here worked CNS, so of course we did anchoring, reporting, all of that stuff. And then I also was the president of the National Press Photographers Association student chapter when that was still at Merrill. And all of this led to this passion for storytelling, and that carried over in news. Of course, when you are doing your packages, you of course need the facts. That is a highly important part, but you also need to deliver it in a way that people are going to want to keep watching. And one of the most important lessons I ever remember from Merrill was Bethany Swain talking about the importance of the first 10 seconds of your package. If you can't capture somebody in the first 10 seconds, they're not going to keep watching. And to do that, you need good visual storytelling, something that's going to keep them going a little crumb at a time as you continue through your journey. And I've employed a lot of those same factors here at the Baltimore Police Department. Before I joined, the video production, the video projects didn't necessarily carry the same type of storytelling elements they do now, which are very news influenced. We are pretty much doing actual packages on officers or units in a way that is, we're telling their story, but it's also delivering a broader message that we're trying to get across with that project. So it could be something like, we want to shoot something for Black History Month. And so I will profile a couple officers and tell their story, but also it's a part of this grander point of trying to deliver our message of what BPD is doing for officers and what they're doing to help those who are coming here. And that is something that is vital in this current role, but whether it's either for recruitment or changing the way people look at us, and all of that comes back to telling a good story. And I think that's been the most important element for me here.
And it's interesting when you were saying like the first 10 seconds, even being in advertising, I'm always thinking about the first shot and the ending shot and like, why do they care? And, you know, really kind of going in this very bulleted kind of conversation. And I realized I had to somehow translate how I thought out loud to other people because I'm like, oh, I'm thinking like a journalist, I'm thinking like production, and I might be talking to a strategist or a creative in a different concept, but we just have these like skill sets ingrained in us. So it's awesome to see how that's happening for you. And then for Michael, let's really talk about that mentorship. And I know you spoke about like networks that you have really played into. How did that really impact the change in your career?
My ability to network and make professional connections has been just as important to me in my career now as my education was at the very start of my career, right? So getting connected with people either at your present employer, people who are members of associations that you are part of, whether they're professional associations, ethnic associations, getting people who can speak to your skill set and to the talents that you have. Are huge, whether they're reference checks to jobs that you're applying for, or people who can kind of put your name forward, who can speak your name in a room that you're not there, is critical. In my career, I've been a part of the National Association of Black Journalists, what I mentioned before. Later on in my career, since I'm out of news, I've been able to take part of what's called NAGC, which is called the National Association of Government Communicators. I work for the federal government. And I had a boss who said, hey, I want you to be able to have some opportunities to grow. I think I was in internal communications at the time. I was working for the Department of Homeland Security. I was running a newsletter, and I was relatively junior in my career. And he was like, hey, here's an opportunity for you to get some exposure. And at the time, it was a learning opportunity. It was a conference that they were having for government communicators. And I went to the conference, got a bunch of, information on how to write better and how to connect whatever projects that you're doing with the mission of the organization you're working for. But as a result of going to this learning event, I was able to make some really good connections. And now 6 years later, I sit on the board of NAGC as its education director. So I can't speak to how important it is not only to get, real experience, but to also connect with people professionally um, that can help you navigate different aspects of your career.
And I wonder how many of us on the panel just can look back and be like, oh, that conversation changed my life, or this experience changed my life in my career. I remember just having a very informal conversation with, at the time, the head of production here at FCB. His name was Joe. And I remember just getting the bug of like, ooh, this feels like storytelling. This feels creative. I like it, and somehow got here. So for everybody else, like, what was kind of that like random moment that you look back and you're like, oh, this network changed my life? I know we're all thinking about it because now we have to look back. Anybody else that's part of an organization? I know some of you guys have talked about NABJ, SPJ.
Yeah, I mean, I got into SPJ when I was on campus, of course, when Sue Katzif was the lead, and that kind of down the road. When I graduated, I came back to Chicago, where I was from, got involved with the chapter here, and over time, that just being involved with SPJ and being at the conventions there has made me a lot of really interesting connections, including for a time. It turned into an opportunity where I was able to work through a partnership with SPJ and Facebook to go around and train various newsrooms around the country. But I mean, I wouldn't have gotten involved in SPJ to that degree if I hadn't gotten involved on campus in the campus organization. That was really valuable for me.
I'll say another thing I got the opportunity to do um, when I went to one of these conferences on how to deliver public speaking. At the end of at the conference, you fill out a little survey saying, how did you enjoy it? And it asks, would you like to be considered as a presenter at one of these conferences. And I kind of checked the box saying, yeah, sure, I'm a journalism major, I can give a talk. And I ended up getting called by this particular organization to give a presentation. And I got an opportunity to do that. And since we're all sort of, journalists, we know how to write, we know how to present, we know how to speak well. I would also encourage people through their networks or through opportunities that come out to take speaking engagements. If you're a subject matter expert on something, whether it's on public speaking or how to write or how to, navigate as a student and trying to transition into the field, take those opportunities to be able to share your subject matter expertise. For me, it paid dividends. I was interviewing for a job within the government, which I got out of the field, and the hiring manager acknowledged during the interview that she had seen me speak at a conference she was attending. So, on my resume, I have all the stuff of public speaking experience that I went to University of Maryland, but she herself had seen me at a conference that she was attending. Sounds pretty random, but I put myself in in places where I had exposure. And it's not all about exposure and me, but it gives you an opportunity to present your skills, and you never know where that can take you.
Yeah, I would just quickly add that along with these types of connections you can make from community organizations, from college organizations, really rely on those skills that you learn about how to find either a subject expert or to find an interview when you are out in the field. Because being the ability to make a connection with an interview, shouldn't just be I'm going to put this person in my package today and then I'm not going to call them again. If you establish these types of long-term connections, they bear fruit, exactly like what Michael is saying. When I was in news in Portland, Maine, there were certain connections I made when I started to heavily do stories related to substance use disorder, that once one person knew that I was a safe person to talk to on this subject, that I wasn't trying to expose them or say something that was too crass about what they're experiencing, the world opens up in terms of who's willing to talk to you, the opportunities that you're able to experience or see, and that goes beyond news for sure. But that is one way that you are able to gain access, is by making these connections.
I'd actually say too, Taylor, to that point, like it's just the power of that comfortability that I think through the experience at the J School and working in news, of just reaching out to people cold who you might want to have, you're not looking for a job interview. You're really looking to like figure out like, what do I want to do next? Or is this what I want to continue to do? And people will almost always say yes to a conversation about what they do. People love talking about themselves. So I think, not being afraid to do that. And I would always lean on my like interview booking and like investigative skills to like cold email somebody, figure out what their email address is. I can't tell you how many people I ended up talking to, whether it was for a job interview or just to like learn information about something that I was interested in by doing that. And so I feel like I'm always still like a little investigative journalist sometimes when I'm reaching out to people, but people are almost always open to having those conversations, and then you can make those types of connections.
And also think about your classmates or your network. Like the amount of times I've moved to a different state and called Olive Reed or Mia Simon or Jatera, like the amount, I'm always calling them and being like, okay, I know you know another alumni. I know you know somebody over here in this state. Like, please connect me. Or just, we have a breadth of people that went through Merrill that just have done amazing things. So make sure you're also building relationships where you're on campus as much as you're building relationships in the world. So just wanted to put that little nugget. Ben, we're coming to you. Tell us about what you currently do, but what was the biggest challenge from coming from a journalism role to a marketing role?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of go back to what Olivia said, that storytelling is kind of been the unifier for me. So right now I work for Ipsos, which is one of the biggest political polling and market research companies in the world. They're based in France, but the US operations are the biggest. For the political polling, we work with big news organizations like ABC News, Reuters, Axios, New York Times, Washington Post, to provide political polling and on other issues around the world. But also for the more market research side of things, we work with, throw a dart at the Fortune 500 and you'll see a client of ours. And we help those folks help understand the world so they can make decisions. But really at the same time, it's really all about storytelling. When I took this job, my boss is also a former journalist, and he described this role as being the best non-journalism journalism job he's ever had. Really, we're just taking knowledge and disseminating it to people. Except the difference is that the people that we're sending information to, if anything, on balance, tend to have more power than your average readers in industry. Again, because we are working with leaders in these big companies, we're working with politicians to send them information that is not out there in the world. We are going out and we are asking large samples of people to a degree that to a number of people that we can provide really interesting insights about the world. We're answering questions that haven't been answered publicly before. I started this job in March 2020. Some of you may remember there was something going on around then. I didn't plan to take a new job because of COVID, but it ended up being a really interesting thing, a really interesting time to get into a place where you can ask 1,000 people anytime you want what they think about the world. So like we started a new poll that my team got to control the content on, and every week we would say, okay, well, how safe do you feel going to the grocery store every week? When's the last time you went to see a movie? How safe do you feel going to a movie right now? When's the last time you hung out with your friends? And we're asking those questions to people every week, getting those answers back, and then writing it up and disseminating it to the world, to decision makers with power to change the way things are done in the world. And just we are responsible for telling that story and helping those people make decisions to change the world. And really at the core of it, curiosity is huge. Curiosity is what drives this role and what drives a lot of the things that we do. As to what I do every day on the marketing team, yeah, I work on, our team controls a couple of polls. I do some writing. Really, I'm part of the content side of the engine. I do a weekly newsletter. I work on some social posts. We have a monthly magazine focused on the future of various topics. So like the future of food, the future of farming, the future of AI, just various topics that we can dive into. And curiosity is just really the biggest driver of that. And it's a lot of fun. Yeah, it's such a great place to be.
Really, I really believe the quote that journalists are the first line of history. I truly believe that, even from the data that you're pulling, even if we're talking about Love is Blind, you are documenting all the history that we're watching when it comes out that is still a historical moment. So it's very interesting how all of us are still kind of aligning to that quote. So I have a question for all of us. How did you know it was time? It was time to go from traditional journalism, really explore kind of those next steps. What questions did you really ask yourself to make that change?
I'll jump in. I think like I'll ask everybody in this room this. Like, I don't think anyone can think of another major that from day one tells you like this job's going to be hard. You are going to work really weird hours. And guess what? You're going to make no money. And they meant it. But I think like the other half of that is that you have to be so passionate about this. You have to love this if you're going to do it. And I was passionate and I loved it for 7 years. And then I woke up kind of one day after like traveling for a story, hearing that my schedule was going to move to like Sundays through Thursdays, and I was going to have to go in again at 5 a.m. And it was like an opportunity, actually, like it would have been a promotion. And I was just like, ooh, I don't know if this, like, I kind of looked around and I was like, is this what I want to do forever? Is there anyone around me whose job I want next? And I really took the time to think about it. And I realized that like maybe it wasn't what my next 7 years were going to be. And so I really like took that step back and started asking myself the questions of like, what about this job do you still love? What are those transferable skills? And like, what do you want to try? And I think what was so easy about doing that was that I knew I was a good journalist. I knew I could go back to news if something else didn't work, but I like really felt this push to take a risk. And it's scary, but it felt right.
Yeah, for me, Shannon, if we have enough time, it was work-life balance. I graduated school, got my first professional job in TV news, and got engaged all within like an 8-month period of time. And I wanted a May wedding. right? But you know what? If you're in TV news, you can't don't think about getting married during sweeps. I remember my news director telling me, he's like, "Don't you know the profession you're in? Why do you want to make wedding?" And I was thinking, I just because that's what the bride wants. So for me, I ended up being in the business for 3 years as a general assignment TV reporter in Charleston, South Carolina, which is around Market 100 or so. So it was a great place to start my career. Didn't have to start somewhere in like Yuma, Arizona, you know. No offense to any Yuma folks if they're out there, you know, but it was a great place to start. But just work-life balance. I got to the point where I got married, started my family, and just like Kimberly, didn't want to be getting into my early 30s in terms of having to work Sundays and things like that. So if it was work-life balance for me. Another thing that I saw, and I've seen this affirmed throughout the years, is that, you know, compensation can be limiting as a television news reporter in a small to medium-sized market, right? Obviously, if you make it to the network and things like that, but the money out there, and this is proven by the Department of Labor, their Bureau of Labor Statistics sort of does different analysis of professional compensations, compensation packages, and within communications in general, the money is in streaming, right? Network and things like that, not necessarily, you know, television news or journalism. And I know that money is not the reason why people get into the business, but it is a reality if you're supporting a family. So those are some of the things that made me kind of transition.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I felt like I had hit a ceiling. I graduated 2009 in the middle of a recession, the last recession, depending how you feel about what's going on right now. And I was one of the lucky few in my class who was able to grind out a career in the industry. I was from Chicago. I tried to get a couple jobs in DC after I graduated, and everybody was cutting their DC bureaus, and so I struck out, came home for a while, and ground my way up till I got to the Chicago Tribune, where I really wanted to be. I was there for a few years. I worked in on some really cool projects. They had an interesting like internal startup that covered startups that was really fun to be on. I was an editor there for a while. Um, but then, you know, layoffs and buyouts started rolling through, and that department shut down. And I was lucky to survive. I kept the job. Folks liked me and kept me around, but there didn't really seem like there were a lot of opportunities for me in the newsroom, because the folks who were still there, who were lifers, were clinging on to their higher end roles, and just didn't seem like there was a ladder for me. So when a former colleague of mine told me about Ipsos, which is a team of all also former journalists who are running this content team there, I was like, yeah, that sounds fun. And I went and went through the process and ended up landing there right, like I said, in March 2020. And I'm glad I did. But you know, I think that the skills that I developed and the experience that I had working in journalism, I value as much as or more than anything else in my professional life at this point. I think it really set me up for where I am today, gave me storytelling skills that I use every day. And those were the ones that I really got when I was at Maryland. So I don't think if I could go back, I don't think I would have jumped immediately. I'm glad that I worked in journalism for as long as I did. But I'm also glad the opportunity opened up when it did, because it's done really well for me and for my family. So.
And I think Merrill really taught us we could do more. We can do even beyond. They were very clear that we were giving you the base so that you can build on top of that. And I think even for myself, after the 2020 election and being in news and just running around all the time, I love the experience. I love the drive, but I wanted to be more creative, and, you know, having experiencing like covering content about the double ranch bottle for Hill Valley Ranch at ComplexCon was really cool. And it was nice to really put content on a different level. So it's also Merrill's fault. They told us we could do anything. There was no ceiling limit. Okay. So you can do anything you guys want. And then this will just be like our final question before we go into Q&A. Again, audience members, please add any questions you have. But the final question for all of us is, what advice do you wish you had when you started exploring new opportunities for landing a career beyond the beat?
So I can go ahead and start with what I wish I had learned personally. For me, it would actually be I wish somebody had sat me down and coached me on how to negotiate for myself. I think that when you are in news, contracts are just what they are. This is what we can give you. And if you don't want it, you're going to go find it at another station. And in the real world, it does not work that way, where you are able to actually fight for yourself and prove what you're worth. And uh, I definitely experienced that in that search when I first left news of if somebody asked what the salary range is, I was always going to be undercutting myself. If they were asking me about hours, or whatever else, I'm of course overextending myself because that's what I'm used to in news. You have to learn how to value yourself first and be able to prove what your self-worth is. And I think that comes along with the idea of being able to negotiate not just pay, of course, but hours, and even being able to stand up to authority figures. Like when you're in the newsroom, news directors, general managers, your parent company will have the final say of whatever goes out. And here in the real world, you can say, well, based off my experience in this or how I see it, this is being reacted to on social media here, this might be the better way to go, and you have a better chance of being listened to and heard.
I would say my advice is to, like, imposter syndrome is real. Fight it. Like, I think because I had such an amazing foundation of education in journalism, I was so scared going into marketing. I was like, I don't know what any of these words mean. Like, I was Googling terms, right? Like, I was like, I don't have the foundation. Like, I should have taken some like marketing 101 class. And like, that's not true, because the foundation of all the skills that we've all talked about makes me qualified for this job, makes me maybe more qualified in many ways because I have different experience. And so I would just say, like, don't be afraid of that and lean on that ability to ask questions, ask for help, learn the way that we have all talked about, because, that is a very real feeling that so many people feel. And don't lean into it. Don't be afraid of it.
Yeah, I'll just jump onto that. You'll be surprised. The journalists really have a highly valued and like sometimes mythologized skill set among other parts of the professional world. People are like, "Oh, you were a journalist? You did the news?" And they're like in awe of the skill set. Like at the core, like we've said, like curiosity is the heart of what we do. It's curiosity and then telling that story again. But there are a lot of people that I meet that are just like, journalists, that are just like, it really just impresses people that we've done that, and they'll value our skill set just on its face. So don't be afraid to lean into that and just try to jump off that as your starting point for like where you're coming from. Beyond that, also in terms of just like looking for new opportunities, you'll be surprised also how many former journalists you find, whether it be Merrill or from other companies that you've met. You'll be surprised how often you'll encounter another former journalist who says, "Oh yeah, cool. Yeah, you did this. Yeah, I know you can do this job," and just helps you get an in there. Or through somebody that we talked to at school, like Shannon was saying, emailing Olive or whoever and just saying like, "Hey, do you know anybody in X city? Hey, do you know da 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 da?" Or email me and just say like, "Hey, do you know anybody in Chicago?" Because I am 100% always happy to connect people in Chicago. I feel like we need more Maryland folks in Chicago. Email me. Uh, um, but it's really, you'd be surprised how well you would do jumping to another place.
And
Yeah,
just kind
it's
of picking up you, Ben, like that methodical feel. I think people don't understand what we're doing because we make the news, we make the package, we make it happen. And so I think it's also finding an environment or a space that really encourages you to have that expertise and to go further, because sometimes people can't conceptualize like what it means to be a journalist. So really make sure you have an environment and a manager in a space that's really encouraging you to take those skill sets and go even further, because they might not understand what you're doing, but as long as they trust that you have the expertise going into whatever field you want to, you're going to excel.
yeah, I completely agree. Every agency, organization needs somebody who communicates well. I currently work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion field within the federal government, a very hot field, right? Everyone's talking about D&I or DE&I and A. And when I applied for the job that I have now, which I got in August, I only had about 2 years of diversity and an inclusion experience. But the team that I'm on, the one piece that they were missing is that there was no speechwriter. Our principal, right, our director does a lot of speaking engagements, and she writes some of her stuff, but she also needed somebody to provide talking points for a lot of the things that she had done. And there was no person for that on the team. We've got a lot of qualified people on the team, but I've done speech writing. I have a degree in broadcast journalism. And even though I'm not so much a subject matter expertise on, things relating to equity and justice and diversity and things like that, I mean, I can, get by in a room. I have a very strong skill set when it comes to written communication. And that's why I was able to get the opportunity that I had. So just like Kimberly said and Ben alluded to, don't underestimate your skill set. If you're applying for an environment that's not a media company, not a marketing company, not a, you have a skill set that is needed at that particular organization, and never undersell yourself.
All right, we have some questions coming in, so I'm going to start asking it in our Q&A. What advice would you give to those looking for professional networks or groups to join? Where can you start your research?
I'm trying to think of some kind of a website. I mentioned NAGC, National Association of Government Communicators. Obviously, that's for people who work for some sort of local, state, national, federal government who are in the communications field. But there are professional networks out there and professional entities. My colleagues on the panel could probably name a few others. Society of Professional Journalists. I know that Sue was a big proponent of that, and she held a leadership position there. So those are just a couple. Those are, and I'm sure that there could be others that others can talk to.
I'll say LinkedIn has been really valuable for me. When we graduated in 2009, Twitter was hot, and I built a really big network based off of that back when it was more of a utopia and less of a hellscape. But there was just like being places where there's a conversation happening around our profession and just around those kinds of things has been really valuable. And I think LinkedIn is the place now where a lot of virtual networking is happening that's really valuable and can help you like present your expertise and show like that you know what you're doing, and then leverage that into the next opportunity. But I mean, I think just in terms of keeping in touch with folks at Merrill that you went to school with, or joining, your SPJs, your NABJs, your NAHJs, just keeping those networks alive and talking to folks continuously is just so valuable. In terms of advocating for journalistic values, the other question that was up here, I think that it all depends on the culture at the place where you are. I think that a lot of what we believe to be right is right. maybe that's too simplistic. But another thing that I learned in the business for a while is that if you make a point, try to back it up with metrics, with data. Knowing your way around a dashboard for whether it be Chartbeat or Google Analytics or whatever can help you make a point a lot of the time. A/B testing. I mean, it's all the same skill set that you learned when you were working at student media, where you argue with folks over headlines and leads and tickers and stuff like that, back and forth. That same skill set of like making a decision and like having to fight for it in the edit bay or in the newsroom is the same skills you use there are super valuable for just being able to prove your point and make sure that what is right is what happens in your day-to-day.
I also think adding to that, what we learn through working in journalism and our education in journalism is that you can't afford to be wrong, right? Like there's precision in accuracy and being able to back that up. And that is something that carries through in anything that you are doing and can help really elevate the people around you if you can get people to stand on those same high standards that we all have. Like you would literally fail a paper or write an article or a package if you had one thing wrong, and that ability to back up anything that you are doing with, why it is right, whatever that information is, or whatever that it could be. Like it's not just gut, right? Like a lot of that is that gut of like, what's right, how to fight for it. And then there's that piece of it that is like, I've done the research. Everything that we are doing can be like checked off, and no one can look at this later and say, well, this was wrong or you messed this up, right? And I think that's something that's really easy to teach the people around you and carry through the work that you do.
I think it also really plays into not just transferable skills, but transferable language. I think words really matter for us. And so when we're talking about journalistic values in our current job, it might not be the word journalism. It could just be being bipartisan. It could be, just doing the research. It could be just the importance of having the facts. And I think that's something that connects people in different, fields of just wanting to have the truth. So sometimes people might not know what journalism means. So it's just really thinking about that language. And I do also think outside of just like the professional networks you jump into, there are a lot of local chapters where you're living can really play that not only helps you connect to the city you live in, but also can help you learn of new people and new organizations that are working together because they're in that same location together. So definitely, if you hear of another organization from another journalist that's in your local area, that's another opportunity. I know there is like Black Girls of Media that's in Chicago. Like there's other smaller branches that are also going on. So make sure you're just kind of like ears to the ground, or maybe being on LinkedIn, you just see at the bottom, people have other organizations that you're interested in. So just make sure you're taking note. Let's see, what are the questions? And then this is, just building upon, Michael, your answer. How important is networking throughout your entire career beyond like job search? And that can be for anybody.
Sure. Yeah. Just like how we were talking about the importance of having a network, the ability to have some sort of connection is going to make a massive difference of getting your foot in the door or not. And for us in our current states, we heavily rely on whether it's these professional organizations or even people who used to go to school or work with us in job markets. I know when I was looking to leave, the first people I reached out to were a list of my friends from my class at Merrill that had already left the business, asking for advice on what did you look into? How did I need to fix this? I would send them my resume. How do I need to change the language per what Shannon was talking about so that it sounds more like what they're looking for in the communications world? People aren't going to understand I did a daily package for the 5 p.m. newscast. You have to say, I produced high quality video content in a fast-paced deadline, like things that people can translate more easily. And I think that along those same lines, relying on those connections you have with your fellow students, with your fellow future coworkers or current coworkers in your news environment, you can get those ins wherever they happen to go.
I also think like networking goes both ways, right? And I think that when you can connect with people and continue those bonds, you never know when somebody's going to re-enter your life or your career in a different way, when they're going to come to you with an opportunity. Or just like, I love surrounding myself with people who are innovative, who are inspiring. And, when you keep those lines of communication open, you might find out somebody is doing something that you're like, oh my gosh, like how can I apply this to what I'm doing? Or, how can I like work with this person who's innovating to make what I do better? But it goes both ways. And I think that's like the best part of networking is when you hear from somebody that maybe you've leaned on at some point and now they want to lean on you, or vice versa. And and just really not always looking at a network for like, what can I get out of it, but really looking at it as the holistic, because I think that that can be really rewarding, both, you know, personally and professionally.
Yeah, I remember my two journalism mentors, Ryan Williams, April Williams, they always said to make sure it's kind of like you succeeded when you can reach back to the next generation, but also reach forward and help too. So that's also something I always keep in mind. It's like, okay, well, what am I also doing? You know, not just for myself, but for like the next generation or even the generation before me, because they helped me get here. So definitely agree, Kimberly. Well, I think that's all of our questions for today. I would love to pass it back to Vince, who started us all off.
Vince is back on. Thank you. What a great opportunity. I listened to a lot of this and I'm like, it's exactly what I went through, of course, being the old man that I am. So thank you all for joining us today. I would like to remind you one more time, if to please follow us on Instagram, Jan at UMD, or Facebook, UMD Journalism Alumni Network. So thank you everybody for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Go Terps.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah, I forgot to
See you
say, go
guys.
Terps.
Go Terps.
Have a good rest of the day, you guys.